Welcome to the Friday Show presented by Woodbine. I'm Pollock Report Bloodstock editor Joe Nevills, joined today by turf writer, handicapper, raconteur, and all-around good guy Andrew Champagne. We'll get back with him in a moment. First, let me talk to you about what's going on up north. We have fall racing at Woodbine this weekend. We got a pair of stakes races for 2-year-olds. We've got the Frost King Stakes and the South Ocean Stakes. Hit that early, pick 5. There's always something going on at Woodbine. Great track to visit, great track to play. Be sure to give them a look this weekend when you're playing your races. Today we have Andrew joining us. We're going to be talking about the Breeders' Cup pre-entries. We don't know exactly who's going in the gate just yet, but we're starting to narrow it down. And we've got Andrew on today to talk about some of the races that stand out, some of the horses that stand out, and some of the trends we're excited about and some we're maybe less excited about. Andrew, thanks for being on with us today.
It's absolutely my pleasure. It's been a little while. Very happy to be back, and for good reason. We've got the Breeders' Cup coming up in a little over a week. Always a fun event to handicap, always a fun event to look forward to. This year, you've got 13 races at Santa Anita, which at its best is a cathedral of racing over on the West Coast, a place I was very proud to call my office for a year and a half when I worked for HRTV. So lots of good things to look forward to coming up over the next week and a half or so.
Exactly. And as someone who did call Santa Anita your home, you're a Californian, you've played that circuit a long time. For people who might not be used to playing California, who might be playing it sort of for the first time for the Breeders' Cup, who aren't used, maybe they play the East Coast tracks, maybe they play Kentucky. What's something that horse players should look at specific to Santa Anita for the Breeders' Cup?
So it's hard to say specific to the Breeders' Cup because if you look back at past years, Santa Anita had the reputation of being a parking lot on big days where if you got out fast, you got to the lead. It didn't matter how fast you were going. Chances are you were holding on. There are a couple of instances of that in past Breeders' Cups that you can look at. Golden Sense exemplified that in one of his dirt mile wins when he went out and I believe 44 and change and nobody came and got him. Fantastic horse, but still, you're not supposed to be able to go that fast and hold on. But that's just the way the track was playing at that point. Of course, a couple of years ago, a number of things changed on the Southern California circuit. So it'll be interesting to see how that plays and if that kind of a bias is there, given the way the track has changed, given some of the local rules and regulations about how much you can use horses, how many strikes of the whip you're allowed, all of that stuff. It'll be interesting to see, but the best tip that I can give you is just you've got some time. If you're planning on playing the Breeders' Cup, watch the races very closely this weekend at Santa Anita.
Let's get right into the races here. Let's start with the Classic. That's kind of the main event, but in terms of the scheduling, the main event usually goes on last, and there's a couple races going on after that. It's kind of interesting, but what's your kind of thoughts on what we're doing with that schedule?
So if you're using the parlance that some of us are familiar with, that treats the last two Breeders' Cup races as almost dark matches in a sense after the show goes off the air. Having said that, I'm going to use this space to give a public service announcement. I understand if you are upset that NBC is not covering the last two Breeders' Cup races over the air. If you think horse racing is anywhere close to on equal footing with college football in November, you need to take a business class. That's just not the way that things work. If your gripe is that you need Peacock to be able to watch the coverage, I understand that. NBC Sports Network and the regional networks, those exist for a reason. But if you're acting as though everything should always be on NBC, look up that deal that NBC signed to broadcast a lot more college football this year, and you will understand very, very quickly why this is happening. It's a weird turn of events with that deal and the fact that the Breeders' Cup is out in California. So the races are 3 hours behind. So that runs right into prime time on the East Coast. It's a tricky situation, but there was no other way that they were going to be able to handle that. Now, with regard to the Classic, there are some interesting stories there to be sure. If Arcangelo wins the Classic, he's your horse of the year. Full stop. Belmont, Travers, Breeders' Cup Classic, that's your horse of the year. You've got a couple of other 3-year-olds, though, that are looking to make a splash. You've got the Kentucky Derby winner in Mage. You've got the top 2 finishers from the Pacific Classic, an Arabian Night and Go Rocket Ride. You also have a horse that I am very interested in coming from the land of the rising sun in Ushba Tesoro, who won the Dubai World Cup, has run once since then, looked sensational in the prep race, and isn't going to be favored, will almost certainly not be the second choice. If Ushba Tesoro is, say, 10-1, Joe, that might be my biggest bet of the weekend.
Ooh, staking that claim now. That's a big deal. That's a big
Well,
deal.
as a horse player, you're always looking for value. You're always looking for that pursuit of value and what that means. If Ushba Tesoro runs the race that crushed the field in the Dubai World Cup, who beats him?
Yeah. I mean, you're not wrong on that. Going back to sort of the California angle, I'm interested in Go Rocket Ride. He's a horse that I feel like kind of keeps sneaking under the radar. I mean, he ran in the Haskell. He won, nearly won the Pacific Classic against older, not the best older, but still older horses. Coming into this, how does Del Mar form tend to carry over to Santa Anita?
So the thing with Del Mar is there are some subtle differences. The first being Del Mar has a very short stretch. So if you're running the Pacific Classic at 1.25 miles, it does tend to favor horses that are on or near the lead because they don't have to work quite as hard to get to the wire once they turn for home. Whereas at Santa Anita, the stretch is a little bit longer, and you sometimes get closers coming in from out of the clouds. For Go Rocket Ride, who is a very, very nice horse, you can argue that the Pacific Classic was a bounce off of what I thought was an outstanding effort in the Haskell, where it looked like Mage was home and cooled out with about 3/8 of a mile to go. He made that big move going around the turn, and Mike Smith all of a sudden looked like the Mike Smith in his 30s, where when he went to the left hand, nobody got more out of a horse than Mike Smith did. All of a sudden, Go Rocket Ride spurts clear again, and you cannot ignore Richard Mandela on a big day at Santa Anita. Remember about 20 years ago, he had that one day where he won not one, not two, not three, but four Breeders' Cup races in a single afternoon. That was probably the best single Breeders' Cup day a trainer has had in the history of the event that is celebrating its 40th year this year.
Absolutely. Going over the list of potential contenders for the Classic, just going over them in my head, I had a hard time nailing down who would be the obvious favorite. And then I realized, dummy, Arcangelo is right there. Dummy, yeah. So he's coming off a really hot streak, but he hasn't run on the West Coast. What do you need to see from him? He's going to be the post-time favorite. Like that's just a fact of life. He's going to be the post-time favorite. What do you need to see from him in the mornings? They're probably going to show the videos of the workouts, either on social media, where have you. What do you need to see from him to feel good? Like, okay, this horse is locked in. This is a horse that I feel serious about putting on my tickets.
I need to see the tote board. This is a horse that beat me in the Belmont, beat me in the Travers, and there's every chance he beats me again in the Pacific Classic. But one of the great adages in the history of handicapping came from somebody who influenced my handicapping as much as anybody, not my father. Guy by the name of Harvey Pack, whose big adage was never bet a horse as the favorite doing something it's never done before. Arcangelo has never faced older horses before.
Yeah.
Never run on the West Coast before. They shipped him out early so that he could get acclimated. His workouts look fine. I have no doubt that he can get the 1.25 mile distance. It's his first try against older horses. He's going to be your favorite. I am not telling you he can't win. I am not sitting here doing the Chris Russo, if this thing wins, I'm retiring, and then immediately going back on that. He's going to be paying for that for a while, by the way. But I am saying that if he wins, he likely knocks out most of my tickets. I might play some saver stuff that leans on prices and a couple of legs before that. But if you're asking me whether I want Arcangelo at 5-2 or a horse like Ushba Tesoro at 8 or 10-1, the value, I think, isn't necessarily there with Arcangelo in the way that it is with some other horses in the field. And if you're looking for a sensational 3-year-old, why not the 3-year-old that's been headquartered on the West Coast, won the Pacific Classic a couple of months ago, and may have a little more room to improve because of how lightly raced he is. Remember, Arabian Night was off to the sidelines after that big, huge win at Oaklawn Park that stamped him as a potential Kentucky Derby favorite.
Yeah.
This is a horse that still might have some room to grow, and counting out Bob Baffert on a big day just seems like a mistake. So just based on the odds board, Archangelo's probably not going to be a horse I'm going to lean on. If he beats me, I will tip my cap. I will gladly cast my horse of the year vote in his direction, but I'll likely be a little lighter in the wallet because of it.
Hey, look on the bright side. You'll have 2 more races to play.
Yes, that's for sure. Late double. But here's my problem with one of those other races.
Okay.
Joe, one of my favorite things about Santa Anita Park is the downhill turf course.
Mm-hmm.
When I moved 10 years ago, I wasn't sure what to think of the downhill turf course. I was prepared to hate it. But then I looked and went, wait a minute. Down the hill, right-hand turn, gradual sweeping left-hand turn, cross over the dirt course, and then you're at the wire. This is great! Why are they not using the downhill turf course for the Breeders' Cup Turf Sprint?
I don't have an answer for you.
The one answer that would make a modicum of sense to me is, well, it's 5 or 5.5 furlongs everywhere else. We want to keep the distances consistent. I get that logic, but at the same time, that downhill turf course is a legitimate drawing card for a lot of interest from a lot of horse players, and it makes races a lot of fun too.
Mm-hmm. Looking at that and knowing that we're going around the turn instead of down the hill, is there a specific horse in that field that you think is helped by the fact that they're not going down the hill?
I don't know, because a lot of those horses had never gone down the hill to begin with.
True.
So
True.
You weren't necessarily sure who was going to like the hill, who was going to hate the hill. So on one hand, it's a puzzling handicapping race. On the other hand, that's what leads to getting horses like Bobby's Kitten at a really big price, because you don't know, and because sometimes those horses find their form going down the hill.
Mm-hmm.
When you're going down the hill, sometimes that relaxes horses that can be a little bit rank. Sometimes it's a case where just being able to control yourself going down the hill is a lot easier of a controlling method than a jockey going, whoa, 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 and trying to grab the horse. Gee, letting a horse be a horse. What a shock. Sometimes that works. But I'm going to miss that. I genuinely enjoy the downhill turf course, and a lot of riders enjoy it as well. I mean, it's telling that when Frankie Dettori came over, his first couple of weeks at Santa Anita, he was an automatic bet going down the hill. You could tell that guy loved those races.
Speaking of Frankie Dettori, I want to go back to the Classic for one more thing here. Frankie Dettori riding very hot after the British Champions Day, going to have the mount on Zandon in the Classic. I'm gonna lean on your California experience here. Frankie Dettori on the dirt, play, no play, or sort of see what happens.
It's less a Dettori thing and more of a Zandon thing. I'm not going to be playing. Credit to Zandon for finally breaking through. Fantastic horse to own. Always gets you a check in some of those really big races. But one, probably the weakest rendition of the Woodward that we have seen in quite some time. The grade 2 Woodward, I may add. Just going to leave that there. Bet against for me. Okay. And especially if Santa Anita is playing kindly to horses with more early speed than what Zandon might have. Frankie Dettori is a must-use in those turf races. Never, ever, 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 ever bet against Frankie Dettori in the turf. Signed someone who cleaned up with Dangerous Midge the race before Zenyatta never got by blame, okay? You want to use Frankie Dettori in those races. In the Classic, good on him for getting a mount. I wouldn't be surprised if Zandon got a check, because that's what Zandon does, but I can't use that horse on top.
Mm-hmm. Now we're going to work backwards on this. Before we move on to Friday's races, I want to touch off on the distaff a little bit, because that race in that division is always a war, and there's some good horses here. You know, we don't have the Malathats of last year, but it's a good solid field. I'm curious who jumps out at you early on.
The horse that jumps out at me is the one that's not there. Nest.
Yeah.
I mean, Nest at her best would have been a significant favorite in this race.
Yes.
And honestly, you can make the argument that she was best in last year's Breeders' Cup Distaff. I thought she got an absolutely terrible ride on that particular day. Herod Ortiz Jr. is a phenomenal rider. He wants that one back. Nest was wide the whole way around the racetrack, got beat maybe 2 lengths. If Nest is able to save any ground, you can make the argument that she wins that race. I'm very happy she didn't. I was against Nest that day. But Unfortunately, she's fallen off a little bit. She is going to be sold and then likely retired as a broodmare prospect. So congratulations to Nesta on what's likely the end of a pretty spectacular career where at her best, she was one of the best. But yeah, it's certainly much more wide open now that the presumed leader of the division ran a couple of clunkers and is likely done for the year. The distaff's always a fun betting race. It's always a blast to see those horses knock heads. So going to be pretty cool to see.
Yeah, Godolphin has a couple live shots here, both pretty mischievous and wet paint. I don't think either one of them are unbeatable in this spot, but both of them could get frisky here. I think pretty mischievous wants to go a little shorter. I don't know if wet paint necessarily has the class to compete against older at this level, but if either one of them did that, wouldn't be the most surprising thing in the world to me. I think both of them are worth consideration at least.
Here's a fun hypothetical. Say pretty mischievous wins the distaff.
Mm-hmm.
Say a horse other than Archangelo wins the classic. Say Up to the Mark doesn't win the mile. Does Pretty Mischievous get Horse of the Year votes with 4 Grade 1 wins, even though one of those Grade 1 wins we really don't want to talk about?
Yeah, that's the kind of thing that you really can't control.
It's a weird hypothetical, but 4 Grade 1 wins is a lot nowadays.
Yeah,
and absolutely. One of them was the Kentucky Oaks too.
And compared to the typical campaign nowadays, she's run quite a bit this year.
At a bunch of different distances. They shortened her up to run in the test. I mean, that's 7 furlongs to a mile and an eighth. That's some versatility. She's a very nice horse.
The distaff would be her 7th start on the year, which for a campaign in 2023 for a 3-year-old that ran in the Oaks Trail races, that's pretty significant.
And there are some options later in the year if the connections get Horse of the Year fever. You can run against the boys in the Clark. You can run against the boys in the Cigar Mile. You could ship to Santa Anita and get another Grade 1 win in the La Brea.
Absolutely. Listen, I hadn't considered it until you brought that up, but, and she really hasn't run a clunker this year either.
No. Nice horse. And I'm not trying to play racing manager with a bunch of people that are very smart and have clearly done right by this filly, but that spotlights how well they've spotted this horse and how Brendan Walsh has her going very, very well. He's a very good horseman.
So let's move backwards even further. Let's go to Friday's card. We're going to look at the 2-year-old races. I think the megastar here, the current megastar and the future megastar is Tamara. I mean, if she wins this thing, she's going to be one of, if not the most high-profile races, profile racehorses, a daughter of Beholder. If she wins this, I think we're going to have a star in our hands.
And I hope she does, because racing desperately needs stars and needs good stories. And you're not going to get many better stories than a daughter of an all-time race mare becoming a blue chip prospect. Her debut win was very good. Her Del Mar debutante was sensational. The comment in the Equibase past performances reads crush. That's not often. Doesn't happen very often. The question with her is whether she can go 2 turns. Now, with that pedigree, that should not be a problem. She's by Bolt d'Oro, out of Beholder. But remember, Beholder is a daughter of Henny Hughes. Henny Hughes was a sprinter. So there is a hurdle that she has to go over. Having said that, based on speed figures, she is strictly the one to beat. And you can argue that she's likely going to be the shortest price favorite of the 13 Breeders' Cup races. That is how much she is respected. And she's one of only a few horses that is likely going to draw a significant amount of casual money. Yes. Because casual fans will see, oh, Beholder, I remember her. And as a result, maybe she should be 8-5 or 9-5. She'll probably be even money, 6-5, even against a fairly sizable field.
Yeah. Now, if you're someone who looks at playing the favorites and says, nah, how do you go about beating a horse like Tamara in this race? Or do you just think, throw up your hands and we just move on to the next one?
So that's going to depend on a couple of different things. We are recording this on Thursday, October 26th. We're over a week out. So a lot of different things can change as far as who actually runs in the race. The last workouts that we see from these horses on Saturday and Sunday, those are going to be huge. But the one thing that I will tell you is something that some handicappers and touts with backgrounds won't. It's okay to pass a race on Breeders' Cup Day. If you, for instance, think Tamara is probably the most likely winner, You don't want her at that kind of a price. Maybe you play a pick 4 that's a small one that singles her just so you have a little bit of skin in the game. But there are 13 Breeders' Cup races, a bunch of undercard races that are also very appealing all
Oh,
weekend
yeah.
long. Save your money. Put your money where your strongest opinions are, to where if your strongest opinion is right, you're going to make a lot of money. There is nothing worse, Joe, and we have all been here. There is nothing worse than coming into a day with a very strong opinion, that strong opinion being right, and you wind up leaving the track breaking even.
Been there. Been there.
Everyone has, and if any handicapper says they haven't, they're lying to you. Don't get distracted by the sensory overload. Handicap when past performances come out next week. Figure out where your strongest opinions are and bet accordingly. Sounds really simple, but when there are so many races going on, it becomes very, very easy to get caught up in the fervor and try to chase when stuff isn't necessarily there.
And that's the thing. Every race on this card is such an opportunity. They're going to be big fields. They're going to be very talented fields. Some of them are more balanced than others, but aside from maybe this one, and it's going to be a full gate no matter what. Like, somebody's got to win the race. It might be Tamara, it might not. Like, someone's going to pay big. Like, there's always that big opportunity on a card like the Breeders' Cup, and it's hard to step back from that sometimes.
Caravel was over 40-1 in the Breeders' Cup Turf Sprint,
Yeah.
which, given the campaign Caravel has had this year, seems ridiculous in hindsight, but we forget how dominant Golden Pal looked.
Mm-hmm.
Golden Pal didn't break, and that was it.
Golden Pal was my single that year.
Yeah, mine too. Mine too. I get it. So just make sure that if you have a strong opinion, you're playing that accordingly, to where if that strong opinion comes in, you're dancing and it's a good weekend, regardless of anything else that happens.
Excellent. Well, are there any other races, horses that catch your eye on this Breeders' Cup card that you want to let the world know about at this juncture?
So there will be more, I imagine, as we wind up getting closer to the event, as the Euros start coming in. They've already started shipping to Santa Anita, and we'll start seeing gallops and workouts. I wouldn't necessarily overwhelm yourself with that information, but there are times where you can see something in the morning and go, whoa, that was really good. Or in some cases, whoa, that was really bad.
Mm-hmm.
I remember many years ago when I was working for HRTV, there was a 2-year-old filly named Crescelium, who was the best looking horse on the grounds when she shipped over. She wound up winning, and it looked like easy money. There was also a case with an unraced Bob Baffert 2-year-old that outworked a horse that was eyeing one of those Breeders' Cup races. The 2-year-old in question was named Beach Bum. On the Sunday after the Breeders' Cup, he went postward for his debut. It was 10-1 on the morning line, 7 or 8-1. But those of us who saw that workout knew that horse could run a little bit, and that wound up saving the weekend, basically. So keep an eye out for that sort of stuff. Don't radically change the way you handicap if you're a successful handicapper with successful handicapping principles. But that content is out there for a reason. Do your homework.
Outstanding. That's good stuff, pal. Well, thank you all so much for joining us on this week's episode of The Friday Show. Andrew, thank you for being on. Where can people find you? If people want more of this, if they want more of what you're putting out there, where can people find you?
Sure. So you can go on Twitter or X or whatever the heck you decide to call it at Andrew Champagne. You can also go to andrewchampagne.com. I'll likely have stuff written up ahead of the Breeders' Cup. Also keep an eye out on social media. I'll be doing a lot of stuff the week leading up to the Breeders' Cup. A lot of video content with a lot of people that I know and even, Joe, actually like. What a concept, right? So very much looking forward to that. This is a wonderful time of year for horse players, and we're going to try to make a little bit of money.
Outstanding. Well, thanks for watching this episode of The Friday Show. I'm going to put our unplugs in here now. Like, follow, and subscribe if you're watching this on YouTube. If you're not, go to YouTube and like, follow, and subscribe. Do us a favor. Follow us on any social media platform that you can think of practically: Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, X, whatever. We even have a TikTok now. Follow the Pollock Report on TikTok. It's a lot of fun. I've been doing a lot of cool stuff on there. But in the meantime, thanks for watching The Friday Show. Thanks to Woodbine for sponsoring this episode, and we will see you next time on The Friday Show. Support award-winning independent horse industry journalism and become a Pollock Report Insider on Patreon. For as little as $5 a month, insiders get access to exclusive Q&As with Pollock Report staff, insight behind our editorial process, exclusive opinions and on-site analysis, Pollock Report merch, and more. This is not a paywall. The website you know and love will always be the same. But if you want more, and you want to make our coverage even better, visit patreon.com/Pollock Report and become a Pollock Report insider today.